Hi everybody and welcome to a new Grimdark episode of Plaguenarr. And we're gonna start with priming the mini black. In my case I use Green Stuff World Matte Surface Primer. One thing I want to mention about this primer that I use this primer because it's very fluid, so I don't have to mix it for priming my minis with an airbrush. And the second thing is that this super matte finish of the primer gives me always a real neutral background for painting basically everything. But let's get into what I'm doing here. I'm currently dry brushing on a couple of volumetric highlights with Pro Acryl Dark Warm Gray. I'm doing this always in some kind of circular motions in the direction where the light would hit the mini, and I'm doing this very roughly here because it's not necessary to spend too much time here. We will anyways apply heavy weathering to this mini, so we will just need some basic light and shadow on the mini. For the big surfaces I use a Artis Opus Series D size L, and for the small surfaces a size M brush. So now we're going over to use some neutral gray to intense highlights on certain parts, the knee pads, the head, and basically the right lower edge of the chest. And again, don't spend too much time here, stick with rough highlights. Rough highlights will fit into the Grimdark theme, just put a little bit interest to the parts you want the viewer to focus on. And to stick with the roughness, we're now using neutral gray, some brush stroke rough pattern to base coat the shoulder pads. And we're doing this with brush strokes into the direction of the light source by maintaining some of the black underneath. Next, we're also using neutral gray just to add a couple of edge highlights on the face and the surrounding areas to put a little bit more attention to them. The face will be one of the main focus points, and this is because I always paint glowing eyes on Grimdark color themes, because I think they bring a certain amount of atmosphere to the themes. So what I'm doing now, I'm adding a couple of chunky edge highlights to the black Templar icons on the shoulder pads. And as you can see, I'm also going here for really chunky highlights, so don't spend too much time here as before, just get it done and that's it. It will anyways get covered by weathering effects. Next, we're heading over to some white magic. We're using bright neutral gray with the regular neutral gray underneath to simulate that the shoulder pads appear white. We're doing this by using the same pattern as before. We're doing a couple of chunky brush strokes into the direction of the light source to bring a little bit of a rough surface feeling to the shoulder pads. And as you can see, the shoulder pads start to appear white just because of the contrast of these cool colors, and this is what I basically call it white magic, because you don't really paint white, it just appears white. And we're heading over to the usual gunmetal gray base coating of every metal part of the mini. One thing, I don't know if I ever mentioned it, but if I paint metallics, I always use an old brush and not my regular brushes I use with regular acrylics. And this is because the metal parts in the metal acrylics will damage your brush over the time. So one of my strategies with metal brushes is that I use brushes that where the tip is damaged or something like that, that I don't want to use them anymore for regular acrylics. I just use them for metallic acrylics, and this is how I basically cycle up my brushes and use them in the whole painting cycle. Later on, if I don't use them for metallics anymore, I simply just use them to apply a couple of technical colors, for example. And we're going over to bright gold and starting to base coat all of the gold parts of the mini. which are the chest eagle and the golden part of the purity seal in this case, and the grip of the sword. To be honest, I did a little mistake here. Normally I would go for rich gold. I simply just took the wrong bottle out of my shelf, but in this case it turned out in the end to be the better choice because of the verdigris we will apply, so simply stay with the bright gold if you want to achieve the same result. With some burnt red, we're now starting to apply a base coat on the weapon casing and the sword casing, and we're basically doing the same pattern as we did on the shoulder pads. We're doing a little bit of a messy base coat here to get some rough structure and texture onto the weapons that will fit into the Grimdark theme. With our first color mix in this painting, we're going for bold pearl red and burnt red in a 50-50 mix and start to apply it. Basically the same as we did with the bright neutral gray on the shoulder pads. Simply go for brush strokes into the direction of the light source from above the weapon. Try to create some texture on the weapon casings by wiping off your brush after you took some color from the wet palette, which will give it a more messy texture and apply some kind of used look to the weapons, which will also fit much better into the Grimdark theme. With pure bold pearl red, we're then just applying a couple of edge highlights on the edges from above and the front, just to enhance the feeling of shadow and light a little bit more. By the way, if you like this kind of guides, be my guest to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, or let me know it in the comment section. I'm also happy on any kind of feedback or wishes what I could do next in my videos. And with the Morgus Bone, we're going over to apply also a rough, messy base coat to the Tabard. And here we're coming to an important part of the guide itself, which I absolutely wanted to mention, and this is basically if you don't want to go for the Grimdark version of this guide and want to achieve more like a cleaner version like my other guides I usually paint, you simply would apply a 2-to-1 mix of Skeleton Horde and water to the Tabard after you're done with the Morgus Bone. And then you simply just follow up all other steps until we apply the oil wash and finish the oil wash with the satin varnish, and you would be done with a clean version of this painting guide. So what we're gonna do now is some kind of moisture dry brushing. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but what I mean by that is you don't wipe off your dry brush as you usually do. I'm using an Artis Opus Series D extra small brush here to apply just a little bit of a texture to the highlights and the surface of the Tabard itself. And this just brings a little bit of texture and roughness to the Tabard that will shine through the weathering we will apply. And if you go for the cleaner version of this paint job, simply just do a regular dry brush here and you will have an amazing result after the oil wash. With coal black, we're now base coating the belt, and I simply just forgot to also paint the inscriptions of the purity seals here. So if you're on this stage, just take your brush and also put on a couple of inscriptions on the purity seals just to save some time. I will do this in a later step because I simply just forgot it here. with my favorite color for speed painting leather on Space Marines or even other miniatures. We're using Doomball Brown with a consistency of 2 parts water, 1 part Doomball Brown, and playing with the black underneath to create also some kind of texture and volumetric highlights, and try to keep it as simple as we can just to get a little bit of a leather texture here. With a 50-50 mix of Doomball Brown and Margus Bone and 1 part water, we're simply creating a highlight mix for the leather texture we created, and we're doing here basically the same as we did on the weapon casing with the Bolt Pirole Red. We're just painting the upper edges or the edges that would catch the light the most and keep it also as simple as we can. With Silver of Pro Acryl, I took this time a really bright highlight for the metal parts. And this is based on 2 facts. First, we're anyways applying an oil wash, which will merge this color in a real good way together. And the second part is that we will apply a couple of rust effects to any of the metal parts. And the rust effect, in most of the cases, takes away the metallic feeling of metals. And with a brighter highlight, you just maintain the metal feeling a little bit more. And by the way, just to mention it, also paint all the metal bolts on the armor itself with the silver. And here comes the Purity Seal fix. And as you can see, I'm doing this really messy here. Just a real thin mix of coal black and water, around about 3 parts water to 1 part coal black. It's anyways also covered by weathering. And here comes the gloss varnish to prepare the mini for the oil wash. And always keep in mind, let the gloss varnish fully dry. And let's talk about oil wash. I use burnt sienna and ivory black of Schminke from the Norma series. And what I usually do is I mix them 50-50. I use the burnt sienna to get in some kind of dirt feeling and the black to get a deep black shading color. And then I take some mineral spirit and bring the whole mix to a, I would say, contrast-like consistency. And then I simply just apply it all over the mini. One thing that you should know about oil colors for oil washes is don't go for cheap oil colors because they're not so high pigmented, and this results in some kind of chipping effect. You will have all of the mini instead of a deep shaded and smooth finish. And the trade-off of oil washes is you have to let them dry for at least 12 hours, but trust me, that's totally worth it for the result in the end.
A few moments later.
And here you can see the finished oil wash dried around about 14 hours in this case. What I'm doing now is I'm simply wiping off all the remainings of the oil wash with a makeup brush. I prefer makeup brushes instead of Q-tips because they don't leave any hairs behind on the mini. And to remove this oilish look all over the mini, we're simply applying a coat of satin varnish all over the mini, and now you have a smooth, deep shaded finish to go on with. Next, I use some rust from Dirty Down, and as you can see, I'm really gently applying it to the belt buckle and the metal parts, the chains. And this is because it's my first time I'm using this effect colors. And let's talk about the mixture here. I'm using this at the moment straight out of the bottle. And this is the perfect way just to apply small patches of rust to certain parts of the mini. But you will see, as I'm exploring this kind of color, and also find a way to hack the colors, I will go really bonkers here, and trust me, I really love to work with these colors as I figured out the way how it works in certain ways. I already got a little bit more confident, so I started to stippling that a little bit more on, but still was not so experienced. But that will change with the verdigris. As you can see, I start to apply it in the same way as I did with the rust on the chains and the metal parts. And then I was thinking, what will happen if I thin this simply down with airbrush thinner? And that was the moment where I really started to enjoy this kind of painting, because I simply had just to use this effect colors like a wash and achieved an overall stunning weathering result. And then I was thinking, why I don't try this with the rust color and apply it all over the armor and see if it even works on black surfaces. And boy, oh boy, this was so fun, because normally if I paint rust effects, I have to use certain tones of brown and orange to achieve a result like I do here with simply just mixing this effect color down with airbrush thinner. And this was in two ways so cool with the effect color, because I can simply thin it down and use it as a wash in the recesses where water would collect and rust appear, basically. And the second thing is, because of the thinning, the effect color got more randomness, so that it even looked more realistic as I applied the color on certain parts. And this is such a fulfilling feeling if you come up with an idea to try something new and achieve amazing results. That's really what I like about the hobby. Guys, every time if you have an idea, just try it out. There will, in some cases, mistakes, but there will also be awesome results. Talking about mistakes, we're going now to tone down the Tabard a little bit into the basing color. I'm doing this here with some slight glazes of Doomball Brown. And later on, if I base the mini, I will also apply some of the pigments I usually use to base my minis. But back to the mistake. So what I did is I used the moss effect to apply it all over the Tabard, because this is where normally moss would appear on this mini. And the problem with the moss effect is simply that the greenish color did not really fit into the theme. The effect itself was really awesome, but this is why I decided to use some contrast skeleton horde and simply just shade everything a little bit more down to a much more dirty feeling. I still try to maintain a little bit of the moss effect, just that the Tabard itself looks a little bit more realistic than just toned down. By the way, I will skip the part where I paint the glowing eyes. I did this now for 20 times in my videos, and I have a separate video on my channel, which should appear in the upper right corner now. So the only problem with fixing the Tabard with Skeleton Horde is that we now have a slight glossy look on the Tabard. We will fix that by applying another thin coat of satin varnish. And here we go with the finished mini. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed our little trip into the Grimdark world, and I hope to see you next time.